Is it time to talk about a Kirk Cousins extension? Why can't the Vikings get pressure? And a whole bunch of other questions from you all here on Twitter Tuesday on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome in to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. Show is on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. You can also find this show on Amazon Fire or Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. And big thank you to everybody who shouted me out and asked me how I was feeling and stuff. I was feeling a little bit under the weather yesterday, so the Sunday podcast or Monday podcast went up a little later than it usually does. Check that out for a Jets game recap. Doing better now, so thank you to everybody who reached out. It's Twitter Tuesday. That means I am answering your questions. If you have questions for me, hit me up at Locked On Vikings on Twitter or at Luke Braun NFL on Twitter, or leave a YouTube comment. I'll just read it there. Or if you're watching on YouTube, or you can send an email to lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com or fill out the Google form that is linked in the show notes. Find a special way to win a Vikings jersey down there in those show notes as well if you're interested in that. Moving to this mailbag, got a whole bunch of your questions here, and the first one I'm going to answer comes from Stampede, who says, given the up and down nature of Kirk's play this year, less consistent but arguably better for winning close games, and the slight cap strain coming next year, would you be open to extending Kirk, and what would your realistic hope for that deal be money-wise? So the responsible answer here is that this is a February question. This is something that we can talk about much later down the road, and we can wait to gather the entire season's worth of data before talking about it. But we will talk about it. Kirk Cousins will be in a contract year next year at a $36 million cap hit. And if they play that out and let him walk, it's $12.5 more million in 2024 as a dead cap charge. So if they want to do something about it vis-a-vis extension, that would be the time to do it. It would be this coming off season. I will I would have to defer until the end of the year. But what they do here will tell you a lot about where the Vikings think they are with Kirk Cousins. Remember, they inherited him. They did not handpick him. And they're very happy to do it. And maybe that might have been some of the draw of taking the job in the first place if they really liked Kirk Cousins. But they're not really as beholden to him as somebody who, picked him out, handpicked him like Rick Spielman would, right? So that it changes the politics. It kind of changes the tenor of the conversation. I think I answered this question a few weeks ago on Twitter Tuesday, and my answer was basically, if he is playing exactly the way that he keeps playing, and he keeps it up all year, then I'm pretty okay with that. With an extension. And I think we've basically hovered around the same level of play. So it's still, you just have to not fall apart. What Kirk Cousins has had in the past has been these sort of really slumpy stretches of play where he's just, awful for, 3-4 weeks, and the Vikings go 1-3 over that stretch. And if I remember, the beginning of 2020 was really bad with a really bad Falcons game in there. And then there was a Cowboys game later that was bad. You can't get that slumpy stretch, so let's not have that. But I do still think that the directive is, hey, keep it up and we'll talk. I'm definitely open to it. When it comes to what the money is, the thing about it is I don't think Kirk Cousins is going to take a discounted deal. You're not going to get him to the table and have him admit, yeah, no, I think I'm just okay. You can pay me just okay money. That's not how these negotiations work. So if you want to extend Kirk Cousins, it's probably market rate, and that's probably going to get pretty pricey. Now, maybe that will be depressed a little bit because of how some of the other big contracts like Matt Ryan's and Russell Wilson's and Aaron Rodgers are. And maybe that can spook the market a little bit and maybe spook the price down a little bit. But again, I can only really speak to it in generalities right now. It's just a little early to ask. But still in the keep it up way, just to have something substantive to say. The answer is still if he keeps it up. Sports King asks, seems like QBs have all day to throw against us. What's the issue? So they're, at least in the Jets game, the answer to this is going to be different game to game. Sometimes it's just a really good O-line and they just beat you. Sometimes it's that the Vikings didn't want to blitz for whatever reason and that they're trying to go for a more, back everybody off into coverage and make it so you can't throw at anybody. And sometimes that's wrong and sometimes it isn't. In this particular game, in this Jets game, the answer for me was that their stunts just took too long. Mike White gets the ball out quick. It's kind of his deal. So that, like, they had Zadarius Smith looping like 5 gaps, or he would start off there was one where he started off in a B gap and he looped all the way around the outside of the opposite tackle. That's running past 4 offensive linemen before you actually start your pass rush. He didn't even get there before the ball was out. That's just too much to ask, and that's not really the best way to use Zadarius Smith, I think. And I do think that if, we're going to talk about like Ed Donatel as a coach, I do think he's done a pretty bad job this year of tailoring his scheme to the talents of his players. It's very clear that he doesn't have the players he wants, and that might mean we get a lot of turnover this offseason. But that's just not the way to use Zadarius Smith. Like, get him on a guard when it's, a pass-only situation. Don't have him loop all the way around, and then Mike White can just get the ball out in 2.5 seconds. When you have a guy gets the ball out quickly. Same thing with Mac Jones. So that's part of it, but getting the ball out quickly also necessitates that you have something open quickly, and so that's on the coverage. And I think a lot of it's on the coverage and mistakes in coverage and stuff. When a guy's wide open in half a second, you're never getting to the quarterback because the ball's always going to be out. So that's part of it too. Ingram's left foot says, did you see any reason for the Vikings to go away from the pressure packages they showed early in the game? So yes, those were, you're probably talking about the nickel blitzes with Shannon Sullivan blitzing. Yeah, they got punished real hard on those. And they were experimenting a lot over the course of this game defensively with personnel and stuff. They had Asamoah in for like a whole drive, just replacing Hicks. That's not something they've done a ton of this year. They had some 3 safety replacing Hicks. I think they realized that the Jets were really going to go at Jordan Hicks in this game, and they did. And they were trying to find ways around that over the course of the game. And nickel blitzing and requiring Jordan Hicks to cover a whole bunch more space, not the answer. So that's probably why. I think it was a greater side effect of like the adjustments you made over the course of the game. John Fisher says, why is Asamoah not playing more? I'm worried that these teams are throwing a lot of quick passes in the flat and we need a fast linebacker to handle these plays. Well, John, why do you think? That's whenever I get asked this, it's like, well, what would your theory be if you had to guess? It's not that they're just super wrong about how good Asamoah is. That's not going to be, and a lot of people think that they're better at figuring out who the good players are than the team. When you see him in practice every day, I'm going to say, all right, if they're playing him a lot, they clearly like him more or whatever. So why wouldn't they be playing him more than Jordan Hicks? And when you think about that answer and then you watch with that in mind, then you can really start to see their perspective. Asamoah is not gap sound. That means that in run defense, he is not 100% reliably going to be in the right place. And that leads to long breakaway touchdown runs. When you just have nobody in a gap, the running back can just run through untouched. And everybody in run defense is relying on the other guys to do their jobs. So if one person is out of place, nobody else is going to be in position to clean that up. It's going to be at least an explosive, if not a breakaway run. If you're not gap sound, you can't be on the field. Full stop. So when Asamoah goes on the field, a lot of it has been in pass-only situations where he's be able to play it a little bit more aggressively and where that ranginess comes into play a little bit more. And that's not to say he's not in on run plays. He has played run plays, but if you want to put him in more, you need to be able to trust him there. And he plays really, really aggressively. He's in the fast and wrong stage where I talk about especially linebacker development. You start and you're just getting used to things. You're slow and you're wrong. You can't figure out what's going on and it takes you forever to read it. And then eventually you figure out how to read it, but it still takes you a while. You're slow and right. Then you go where Asamoah is, where you start reading it fast, but you're basing it on instincts that haven't developed. When you're not thinking anymore, you're just feeling, but those feelings need to get experience. So you're fast and wrong. And then eventually your instincts develop and you can be fast and right. And that's when you can actually be a dude. That's where Asamoah is. Waka Waka asks, is Duke Shelley kind of a baller? Worth keeping on the roster in the future? Not a baller. Definitely had his moments of getting beat in the last 2 games, but I think he's earned a camp invite for sure. Come in, see if you can't make the team. I have a whole bunch more questions, so we are going to get to them. But first things first, it is the time of year where you might be making a final push in your small business. Have a whole bunch more questions here on Twitter Tuesday, so we will get to those. First things first, though, let me talk to you about hiring season. All right. It is that time of year where you're trying to make that final push so you can hit your numbers in Q4, or maybe you're gearing up for a new year, new cycle of hires. Either way, put that job on linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. You can do it for free. It is unbelievably easy to use LinkedIn Jobs, and their market is insane. I mean, who do you know that's not on LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn Jobs is rated by small businesses #1 in delivering quality hires versus their leading competitor. They have simple tools like screening questions that make it a lot easier to find somebody that's right for you and your company and your culture, because it's always going to be different than the guys next to you. And LinkedIn helps you differentiate and really treat it like the unique thing that it is. So go to LinkedIn Jobs. You can post your job for free. That's at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thanks a bunch for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. All of the biggest games, all the biggest stories, all around the wide world of sports. You can find that wherever you find your favorite shows. Also, check me out on Patreon, patreon.com/LukeBraun-NFL. You can find that if you're looking for more in-depth film breakdown and stuff like that should be posting a little later than usual in the week. And so I kind of got a slow start to this week, but we will push onward. Next up on this Twitter Tuesday mailbag, more serious question that comes from Kelsey U, who asks, how solid is the concussion protocol if we've now had multiple players get hurt and clear it only to get taken out early in the next game with another concussion? Or is that just some bad luck stuff? So I don't think the concussion protocol is sufficient to truly protect players. I think it's sufficient from a liability perspective. I think it's sufficient to prevent the NFL from getting sued for not protecting their players, but I don't think it actually prevents CTE that well. There are too many places in the concussion protocol where a bad faith actor or just incompetence or even a genuine mistake can put a player in genuine danger. I think players should just kind of have to sit out more. I think they just need to go a little bit further with it. And I know that's a bummer because we want to see our favorite players play, but yeah, and I think this is a symptom of it because both Caleb Evans and Christian Darrisaw went through the concussion protocol step by step as you're supposed to. Same, I believe, at least with Tua Tagovailoa and, you name it, whoever, right? They went through the protocol as it was. Now, it can be total bad luck. I kind of do think Christian Darrisaw's was bad luck because if you watch the play where he got his second concussion, it was in Dallas. It was a strip sack. I want to say it was Micah Parsons' strip sack. He took a big knock to the head on that one, and you could tell, and he went out like right away, and like you could tell, okay, that's going to get him. I did not see the second play, the play that hurt Caleb Evans. I haven't clocked that yet because I'm not that far in the film yet. I'm a little behind where I usually am on a Monday night, but we'll see what we see there. However, what I don't know is if I'm even right about, like, does having a prior concussion make you more susceptible to future concussions? I'm not very well versed on that, so I'm not going to speak to it. But football's a very violent game, and this is going to be part of it forever. Kind of feels like the league is doing the bare minimum, and they're within their rights to do that. This is America. You do the bare minimum. There is a bare minimum. But I think calling out the concussion protocol for perhaps being insufficient, I don't think is very out of line. Red and Purple asks, if you could only keep one, Kendricks or Hicks for next season, who are you choosing? Oh, Kendricks, easy. Kendricks has struggled this year. I'm sure his PFF grades are bad or whatever, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, like, he has been slow. He's very clearly still reading. He's going through, thinking in a different language. And I think next year, provided we don't see a huge drop-off in athleticism because he's like over 30 now or whatever, I think we get something better out of Kendricks. Hicks kind of always felt like a one-year deal. He's very cuttable next year. They've got Asamoah sort of waiting in the wings, already taking snaps from him. Hicks feels like he's a bridge player, and he was just here for 1 year. Thank you for your service. Now we'll get the guy we handpicked. Now we'll get the guy we drafted that we got really excited about, that, Kwesi was watching in the dark. Or no, that was a Caleb Evans, the Ghanaian. They're also tight there. A really cool piece on the Vikings YouTube channel, by the way, with those two and William Quinku. Stezo asks, how big a role do you see Rager being able to get himself on offense before the end of the season? I don't see it growing a ton. I think it would have already if it were going to. He's made a couple of plays, and that's great, but I think like 2 or 3 snaps on offense is kind of where it tops out. At this point in time, because of the mistakes that he's made in terms of assignment soundness, kind of the same thing as Asamoah, but the other side, that makes me a little more worried to put him on. Like, I'd rather have KJ Osborne on the field in pretty much all situations, unless you want to hand him a jet sweep and a gadget thing every once in a while. Great job to come back to the play on that one big one. But that's one play. I need to see a little more. And there's only 5 games left. So I say, we'll give him, you could probably count his weekly offensive snaps on one hand, and I don't think that that's going to change. If it does, that'd be cool. Matt Guess says, do you have any idea why we haven't seen Boyd on D this year? Man, this whole mailbag is these questions. Why don't we see more of this guy? Where is that guy? What about that backup? It's like you guys want to just switch up the whole roster in December because he's not better than Duke Shelley. I don't know. It goes back to the question about Duke Shelley earning a spot to come back in camp. He has not been great. When Chris Boyd played, he was the under corner on the half side all the time. He was very protected. That's like the most protected a cornerback gets, is when you have a half safety over the top of you and you're playing underneath it. Like that's as little as you can ask of a cornerback in most coverages, or maybe the cloud corner in cover 3, which functionally is same idea. You're covering underneath on the sideline with help over the top. And so Boyd was always that. We did not see a ton of Chris Boyd last year or in the Zimmer years playing like true cornerback. And the Vikings have asked Duke Shelley to do some of that. Now, I think that's a mistake. I think that's believing in him way too much. But yeah, I guess not. I mean, Chris Boyd's been a great special teamer, so he'll always have a spot on the team for as long as the Vikings want to keep him around and keep paying him. But I would say right now, he's just not better than Duke Shelley. That would be my guess. And as much as Duke Shelley has struggled at times, he's also had some great pass breakups and stuff. Like, it is not difficult to imagine cornerback play that is worse than Duke Shelley's. You just got to think back to, the Holton Hill years for that, I think. Or the Tankersley and Chris Jones, the end of 2020. That was a group that Chris Boyd was like at home amongst. So yeah, I just don't think he's better than Duke Shelley at this particular stage. Great special teamer though. Mason Show supporter says, how big of a problem has Duke Shelley having to start Bin? Seems like our defense started struggling in the open field once Evans was out. I don't think that had anything to do with Shelley necessarily. It might have made the defenses easier to read because they were like trying to protect him more or whatever. But you'd rather have a Caleb Evans and you'd rather have Dantzler than either of those two. But I think he's for a third string, or I guess call it fourth string corner, since Andrew Booth was ahead of him too. I think that works for a fourth string guy you pulled off of someone's practice squad. Like, once you get down, when you suffer 3 injuries in the same room, you can't really expect to have like a good backup quality player left. Like, we had a good backup quality player in a Caleb Evans, and I do think he's a good backup quality corner in this league, but then he gets hurt too. And so what do you have, like 9 of them waiting around? Nobody has that. So has it been a problem? Less than I think I would have expected, considering the volume of injuries the Vikings have sustained at corner. Michael Ejigu asks, am I crazy, or does every opposing kicker who steps foot in US Bank Stadium have a career day? You are not. That is actually a trend, and it must be luck, right? Like, you have to, like, there's nothing the Vikings can really do to influence opposing kickers outside of play outdoors and not on turf, I guess. It's got to be something with that. I don't even know if turf is easier. I'm just assuming so because that of how good kickers are in US Bank Stadium. It just sucks because the Vikings can't find one of their own. Hey, Greg Joseph made all his kicks in this game. I shouldn't go too hard on him. But no, that has been a thing for like decades. It's absolutely a thing. You're not crazy at all. Got a few more questions that I want to make sure that I get to. So we will wrap up this Twitter Tuesday mailbag in just a bit. First, I want to tell you about a new slate of football podcasts coming from Audible, including Block Forever, which you can find a sneak peek of available on the Locked On NFL Podcast Network. Block Forever is a brand new podcast hosted by former NFL All-Pro Ryan Khalil, brother of Matt. He gives fans an insider look through the eyes of the greatest players and greatest personalities of all time. Stuff like Christian McCaffrey talking about his love-hate relationship with fantasy football, or guys giving honest opinions on their other players at their positions in the league. Player psyches, how they feel about sports betting, how they feel about playing through pain, some of the more behind the scenes nitty gritty stuff that you can't necessarily get, especially with the former players who aren't beholden to NDAs and contracts anymore that can really speak freely about this stuff. It's really cool. So go to Block Forever right now. You can again find a sneak peek on Locked On NFL or catch the full series available anywhere you get your favorite podcasts, including Audible. Get in the game. Moving on with this Twitter Tuesday mailbag. The next one I'm going to answer comes from Josh, who asks, should we look at Richardson from Florida as a second rounder to learn from Kirk? So my answer to this, again, it's I don't know a thing about Anthony Richardson. I couldn't pick him out of a lineup. That draft stuff I will get into way later in the year when it's the off season. So you'll have to ask somebody else about if he's good or whatever. But my thing with rookie quarterbacks is always never a bad idea. I don't think it's ever a bad idea. What if that dude is, the next second rounder, if you say he is? What if he's Jalen Hurts and you could just have Jalen Hurts waiting in the wings and eventually you could get cheaper at quarterback? That's, of course, always going to be a good idea for anybody. If he's good, right? You got to hit on the guy. Don't do this for a Jordan Love, right? There's the difference. So, yeah, sure. But whether or not the Vikings do that is going to come down, they'll tell us in February. If they extend Kirk Cousins, then it's pretty obvious they're not going to take a quarterback. If they don't, and they absolutely can get away with not extending Kirk Cousins, the way that contract is structured, it is perfectly reasonable to play out that final year and let him walk into the void years. That seems like it was kind of made for that plan to be a viable option. So if they don't, then yeah, we're probably looking at quarterbacks, and how much research I do on the quarterbacks will probably be predicated on that decision. Caden Fiedler asks, what is our defense's modulus of elasticity? In other words, how much can we bend before we break? So I'm planning on doing this when I get to all the tape of the red zone reps, because the Vikings obviously had a ton of great red zone stands in the game against the Jets. There are some things that are different in the red zone than they are between the 20s. Namely, there's just not as much space to cover. And so how deep you can't play too deep when there's only 10 yards between you and the back of the end, where you lined up in the back of the end zone. So you kind of have to play it more aggressively, and then by force you can be a little bit better. And I think that speaks to, in particular, what the Vikings problem is that they are ceding too much space. And that's both depth and width, but depth can be kind of solved when you run out of depth. You just don't have anywhere else to go. And so that how much can they bend, not break? It's just that, yeah, I guess the problems that ail them are a little bit papered over once you get into the red zone. That's not to say that they've been, I don't know, I don't really love how they've been in the red zone the last month or two. They've given up a little bit too much for my tastes there, but yeah, sure. That it does get better, and you would see that. Matt in Wisconsin asks, how does next year look for the Vikings secondary, maybe relative to what the future outlook might have been a year ago? The outlook's kind of the same, unless you're ready to give up on rookie D-backs, which I'm never going to do in their rookie year, especially when they get hurt. But it's kind of the same. Patrick Peterson is, 1 year left in him? Maybe, probably not. That's going to end eventually, probably sooner rather than later. Same with Harrison Smith, sooner rather than later. So you've got holes there you need to fill in. If you like Cam Bynum and you like the idea of Lewis Seen, sure, you can plug those guys in. But even take Patrick Peterson out of this corner group, right? And you're left with Cam Dantzler, Andrew Booth, Caleb Evans, guys you can pluck off of waivers, right? That is not a finished room. So I think the future of the D-back room, I don't think they're all in purple yet. And that's actually probably the single position I want them to draft most, especially with what looks like it's going to be a fairly late pick. TJ Mahaffey says, what's the best place you've visited? Best place that I have visited. I've been fortunate to travel to some pretty cool places in my life. The one that comes to mind is Delphi in Greece. I went there a few years ago, got COVID there, but probably got COVID there. It was before it was like really big in the news, but we were very sick and we were like, But yeah, we took a bus up. We were on a vacation through Italy and Greece, and we took a bus up from Athens to Delphi, where like the Oracle is. We could see all the ruins and stuff, and it was like this very sleepy kind of day. The snow was coming down in these big giant snowflakes. It was like idyllic. And then we ended up getting snowed in there and stuck up there for most of the night. And then we got on a bus, had to drive like 5 hours all the way home because we had to go down the other side of the mountain. Otherwise, it would just be iced over and we would have missed our flight home. That was the last day of our trip. So that all sounds very stressful and awful. But despite all of that, I still think all the time about how nice and lovely Delphi was as this like small European hamlet. There's literally a dude just like herded his goats through the town. And that seemed like just like where he goes every day. And it's just like the embodiment of peace. It was lovely. Airfish asks, is there anything in particular we can gain from this game with regards to Kevin O'Connell's ability to game plan for facing his team for the second time? Oh, you mean the Detroit game? Could this have implications in the playoffs with Dallas and or Philly? Yeah, that's a really good angle. Yes, for sure. They're playing the Lions. This is the first time that they will have played the same team twice in a season. Do they bring out new wrinkles? What do they have planned for that? I got to imagine you usually have something planned for your division games. It's not like this takes you by surprise. But when it comes especially to Dallas and Philly, you kind of have to bank on the idea that the Vikings can bring out something different than what they brought out the first time. And with Philly, definitely, right? They're a way different team than they were week 2. And we kind of always knew that the first few weeks would be a little bit of a pulling it together thing. I thought they'd lose a bunch of games, and they kind of won in spite of that, except Philly, but they're a way different team. And same with Dallas. That was the Cowboys won that game kind of in the trenches and only in the trenches. And so I think if they have to play Dallas again, I mean, I would be very surprised to see it be that same kind of blowout. But there is something to proof of concept. If they lose Detroit, if they lose to the Packers, if they lose to the Bears, like if they lose all those road games because the other team brought out something and then they just can't beat a team twice and this becomes a narrative, like, yeah, sure. I don't see that happening. But that's definitely an angle to look at this one with. Like, how do you do this differently? We have TJ Hawkinson now. How do we look at this? Now they have Jamison Williams. It's a different team with a different vibe. And then finally, Mac asks, Ben Gessling wrote an interesting article about Patrick Peterson's weekly dinner and film review session for defensive backs. The article noted that the group reviews all of the Vikings' first and second down passes, talks over pre-snap alignments on the team's defensive calls, and discusses how wide receiver motion might affect a coverage on a given play. And so Mac asks, why limit to only first and second down passes? Is there less to be gained from third or fourth down pass tape review? Yeah, so when it's just a different category, if you look at anybody's practice schedule, and I know you can, I'm pretty sure, I want to say it was John Wolford posted his once, like in a Player Tribune article or something. You can see these. I know Kirk Cousins has given a seminar a few years ago where he described his, if you can find that. But it always kind of breaks down that way, where it's like, okay, Wednesday is first and second down, Thursday is third down in red zone, Friday is, is everything, or depends on the coach, but it's usually breaks down like first and second down and then like situational, which is third down, red zone, because of, the difference between a 2nd and 6 and a 2nd and 12 is something, but a lot less than the difference between 3rd and 6 and 3rd and 12, right? Or, 2nd and 3 versus 2nd and 12, 3rd and 3 versus 3rd and 12. It's a little bit different because on a 2nd and 12, the run play is still a viable option. On a 3rd and 12, it isn't. And so play calls and read rules and all sorts of stuff gets mixed up. So it's just a different mindset. So I think there's focusing on one thing versus the other. And generally, yeah, you're going to have more first and second downs than you will have third downs. Like sort of mathematically you have to, right? So the first and second down passes are probably going to be more worth your attention because there's just going to be more volume of that. I would guess. I'm sure they would want to study it all if they had time, but I would suppose that they're just like kind of focusing on the meat and potatoes. Tomorrow, I'll get into some of the stuff I noticed about the Jets game. Because I was so out of it on Monday morning when I did that show, I'm looking forward to sort of circling back on some of the stuff I said there and checking in on it. So please come join me for that. And then, of course, we are going to talk to Matt Derry of Locked On Lions on Crossover Thursday, and then do bets and bold predictions on Friday. Same week like always. I will see you all for that. And as always, Skull.